I'm back with another video on a poem I think you all like, that is To the Nile by John Keats. Grade 11 students have already done this poem. As you all know, this poem belongs to the theme nature. Why I thought of doing this particular poem is because there was a request in one of your comments to discuss about the different approaches or perspectives the poet has towards the River Nile. Okay, without taking much time, we'll go on to the question. Here we have the question. The poet presents two images of the Nile. Do you agree? Justify your answer taking examples from the Nile, from the poem To the Nile. When you answer this question, it is a must that you should address about both images presented by the writer. I will discuss about these two images or perspectives in a moment. And don't forget to elaborate your points using examples to support your point, right? And there's another thing. Imagine you have delivered examples or quotations to support only about one fact or perspective. Then you would not get full marks for content. You know that you get 7 marks out of 15 for content, right? So as always, please remember to address the question directly. Here you can agree with the statement given in this question. So before I move on to elaborate about the two images, I think it would be beneficial if I give some facts about the geographical background or setting of the Nile. As you all know, it is the longest river in the world and it originates from Lake Victoria and flows through many countries, making them fertile. You know that Africa is a country where you can see vast and sandy deserts, and this river can be considered as the life-giving source for the people who live in the continent. And finally, it empties its water to the Mediterranean Sea. So having said that, we'll move on to discuss about the structure of the poem. If you count the lines in this poem, you would be able to see that it has got 14 lines. So it is considered as a sonnet. When you read this poem, you feel like there are two parts in this poem. There is a clear difference between the thoughts in the first 8 lines with the last 6 lines. So this first stanza with 8 lines is called an octave, and the second stanza with 6 lines is called a sestet. Since the poem has this particular structure, we call it a Petrarchan sonnet form. There are various sonnet forms, and usually the difference is in the division of stanzas. For an example, another form of sonnet is Shakespearean sonnet form, where the stanzas are divided to 3 quatrains and a couplet. That means 3 4-line stanzas and 1 2-line stanza. So that is some extra bit of information. What you have to remember is that To the Nile is a Petrarchan sonnet. This structure of the poem is very important. The poem has 2 stanzas, and in each stanza, different aspects of the Nile is brought out. It is easy for you to remember about these contrastive perspectives when you keep that in mind, associating it with the structure. So the octave brings out the holy, sacred, mythical aspect of the Nile, and the sestet emphasizes about the ordinary and practical output of the river. When you answer this question, as I have told you earlier, you have to elaborate on both these features of the Nile. That means the divine mythical aspect as well as the ordinary aspect of the Nile. First, I am going to discuss about the mythical, respectful or venerated perspective of the River Nile. In the octave, the poet presents an extremely respectful vision of the River Nile. He starts the poem by saying that the River Nile is the son of old moon mountains African. The masculine personification of sun emphasizes about the power and strength of the River Nile, and the old moon mountains has some connotations with the heaven. So the poet deifies the river, saying that it is a sun from the heaven. Therefore, the river also has a heavenly element. So the poet suggests that it is not an ordinary river, it is a sacred one. In the second line, the poet says that it is the chief of pyramid and crocodile. Here again, we can see a metaphor, and I have to mention one thing. The poet has used many literary devices, or in other words, figures of speech, when he wrote this poem. I will discuss about these techniques at the end of this video. Now let's move back to the chief of pyramid and crocodile. Why do you think the poet has given this particular designation to the Nile? First, we will discuss about chief of pyramid. You know that pyramids were built using giant stone blocks. How do you think these people brought these huge stones into their respective places? Of course, using the River Nile. If you are a Sri Lankan student, I think you definitely have watched Surapapa, right? So there we have an episode where we can see this particular situation. And the English name of that cartoon is Asterix. There we can see they have helped Queen Victoria to build one of her pyramids, and block of stones were brought to the site using the River Nile. And then the River Nile is considered as chief of crocodile. Why do you think the poet has used this kind of an expression? Because it is believed that world's largest crocodiles inhabit the water and banks of the River Nile. And also, crocodile also has some affiliations to their ancient religion, where those creatures were considered sacred animals. It is the same as Hindus consider cow as a sacred animal. So we can easily understand that this metaphor brings out veneration and respect River Nile holds over the people. The concept of pyramid is not just about tombs of ancient pharaohs, but it also suggests about the great ancient civilization which flourished with the benevolence of River Nile. It had great influence on the agriculture as well. So here we can see one image, that is the ancient vision of the River Nile as holy and powerful life-giving source. Ancient people who lived here had to work hard and toil under the hot sun, and they had to walk thousands of miles in the desert. So for those people, River Nile was their life source. Therefore, they venerated and feared the Nile. The River Nile not only helped in developing just a civilization, but also it contributed in promoting commerce and trade. In the line twixt Cairo and Deccan, we can see an important milestone in the Silk Road, both the maritime and land Silk Road route. So the Nile, without doubt, helped to develop the nation up to that kind of higher place in trade, and it has acted as an agent to spread that development throughout the continent, not just Egypt. So here too we can see that the poet has brought out the respectful veneration of the River Nile. Now we will discuss about one of my favorite topics related to the poem, the mythical beliefs associated with the River Nile. Of course, there are many, but today I'm going to discuss only about two because you will only have a little bit of time to mention these things in your answer. So, the most important mythical aspect associated with the River Nile is the myth of god Hapi. People in ancient Egypt believed that god Hapi is responsible for the annual overflow of the River Nile. This flooding is considered not as a bad thing, but rather the opposite. People thought that it is a blessing. Why? Obviously, when the river overflows, it brings with its water the fertile mud inside the river into the banks. That mud becomes very useful for agriculture. So people worshipped god Hapi for helping them with the agriculture. The second myth is also very important. That is the legend of Osiris, Isis and Seth. It is actually a long story, and if you are one of my students, then I think you can remember the story because as I can remember, you were very eager to get to know the story. And if you haven't heard about it, then just Google it. It's that simple, right? So without narrating the story, I would just say that Osiris and Isis were very important figures because it is believed that they were the ones who taught people the skills of agriculture, and there are 36 shrines along the banks of the River Nile dedicated to Osiris. And once you've found the myth, you'll know why. So here, through these myths, we can see how important is the part River Nile played in the lives of people. That is why they considered River Nile as holy and sacred. Then the poet says that the Nile is nurse of Swart nation since the world began. Who is this Swart nation? They are the black-skinned Egyptians and Nubians who held sway over or dominated the Nile Valley for centuries. The poet says that the Nile has supported and nursed these great, strong military personnel. This metaphor also emphasizes how important a role Nile played and its great contribution for these people. This, as I have earlier mentioned, is the reason for this venerated wave point of the river. So, in a nutshell, the octave emphasizes the contribution of the river to the civilization and how people witnessed or considered the Nile as a divine element. So, in the octave, the power and capacity of the River Nile is exaggerated to bring out that respective wave point of the river. After the octave, we have the volta. Volta means a change of attitude. We have discussed that in the octave, the poet brings out the divine vision of the Nile, but then he changes his attitude and the sestet brings out the next wave point. This change in attitudes or the volta is a typical feature in Petrarchan sonnets. Usually the sestet changes the direction of the poem. Therefore, in the sestet, the speaker dispels the mythical vision of the Nile and brings out the natural pragmatic wave. He says that the river Nile is similar to the ordinary rivers which make land green on its way to the sea. Here the poet disagrees with his former idea that River Nile is holy. From here onwards, the poet elaborates ordinary features of the River Nile. Actually, there are 4 phrases which discuss about this practical output of the Nile. In this slide, I have discussed the first fact. The poet says, "Thou dost bedew green rushes like our rivers." Here, bedew means make fertile. Rushes means vegetation or plants. So the general idea in this phrase is the river Nile makes the plants and vegetation fertile, just as any other river. Here, our rivers means actually the rivers in England, because John Keats was an English poet, but this is common to all the rivers in the world. They make everything fertile when it flows. Therefore, the poet says that the Nile is just like any other river. The second phrase is, and does taste the pleasant sunrise. Here the poet says that the river makes the sunrise tasteful. The effects of this gustatory image is it brings out the delightful image of the sunrise. We all like to see the picturesque vision of sunrise beside a lake, right? So the feeling is common beside any river. The next fact the poet brings out to discuss about the pragmatic viewpoint is, green isles hast thou. I think all of you have seen at least one river in your lifetime. They might not be as magnificent as the River Nile, but anyway, they have small green isles in it. So not only the River Nile, but all the other rivers have got this feature which makes the Nile an ordinary river. Then the poet says, and to the sea as happily dost haste. We don't see any river which flows from sea to inland, do you? So here also the poet has told that the Nile too flows to the sea as any other river. So here we can see how the poet has presented the practical outlook of the River Nile. In short, the sestet brings out the real vision of the Nile, not as a god which is presented in the octave, but as a part of nature. Earlier, I have mentioned that the poet has used many literary devices in this poem, especially in the octave. That is to illustrate the divine, powerful, sacred viewpoint of the river. The more figures of speech you use, the more respectful and holy the subject becomes. Of course, we can see some literary devices in the sestet too, but the number of instances is lesser when compared with the octave. I have promised you that I will discuss about literary devices. So, the first is personification, where the inanimate object is compared to an animated sun. And then we have inversion. What do you mean by inversion? That is changing the word order. Instead of saying African old moon mountains, the poet has taken the word African to the end. This is to give prominence to the moon mountains to bring out the divine quality of the river. Then we have many metaphors like chief of Pyramid and Crocodile, nurse of Swart nations, and so on. Then we have rhetorical questions like, art thou so fruitful? And the poem, as you can see, is written in archaic language, that means Old English. Why does the poet do that? It is obvious, to give respect to the river. So in the sestet we can see that the poet dispels the former illusion or mythical viewpoint, paving the way to reality. After elaborating on both these aspects, you can conclude your answer saying that the poem of course brings out two images of the River Nile, the mythical, divine, sacred perspective and ordinary practical perspective. So that's it. If you like the video, please give a thumbs up, and if you still haven't subscribed to my channel, please press the subscribe button below to receive my latest videos. Okay students, goodbye and have a nice day.